how do we encounter the sacred in our everyday divine? So how do we find Jesus in those places of our lives that aren't me sitting in mass or me sitting in the adoration chapel or me sitting in my favorite prayer corner in my house? Where is he in the other parts of my life?
Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance, where we dive deeply into topics of both earthly and eternal consequence. I'm Roxanne Solonen, faith columnist and features writer for the Forum, author and speaker. I met my guest today, Lisa Hendey, many years ago when she was just dipping her toes into the World Wide Web, as we called it then. I was a young mom and writer looking for connection with other moms in the trenches and seeking a faith perspective. I stumbled upon this website that Lisa founded, CatholicMom.com, at a time when we were still on dial-up. That dates Lisa and me. It was a tedious process just to call up a website, but we connected there, and at some point in those early days, Lisa invited me to write a piece, which has led to many published articles through the years. Lisa had a chance to watch my writing career take off, but I also had a chance to observe hers from afar. She's in California. And honestly, it was amazing to witness. In the Catholic media world, Lisa became a significant voice, despite her project and ministry starting out so humbly, really just as a mother who loved her children and wanted to help imbue within them a life of faith. I've been blessed to have met Lisa in person several times at various events. The first time was at a Catholic Press Association conference, now the Catholic Media Association in Indianapolis, when I had just started working at the Fargo Diocese in between my stints here at the Forum. Lisa graciously shared a hotel room with me, and I got to see her busy life in ministry up close. Her work in the world of evangelization, in spreading the good news, has taken Lisa all over the world. What has she learned in these adventures about God and his yearning for relationship with us? I'm looking forward to hearing from Lisa today about the ways we can encounter Jesus in our everyday lives. So let's meet Lisa Hendey. Welcome, Lisa Hendey, to Matters of Soul Importance. I'm so happy to have you here with me today. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. It's such a joy to be with you. And I feel like it's been too long since we last talked, but it's always a great treat to be together.
If I recall, it was in 2019. I've thought of this conference a lot, but it was a Catholic Media Association in Wisconsin. And we had a couple, you invited me to a table. We had lunch together. We chatted in the hall. And it's just always been a joy to cross your path, whether hearing you on the radio or, whatever else. You've been out there a lot. So I'm excited to kind of hear your whole story because it's one that I've kind of watched with fascination. And we're going to talk about one of your latest projects, mainly your book, Jesus Every Day, Every Way, which I have right here in front of me. But kind of related to that, our question will be, can I talk to Jesus in the grocery line? And of course we can, but what does that really mean in practical terms? We're going to get into that. But before we do, Lisa, I always like to go back and begin with the earlier years. A lot of people in the Catholic world are familiar with you. This is a podcast that goes out to a lot of other people. They might not be Catholic. So I want to, kind of start at the beginning. Like, tell me a little bit about where you grew up and like what the faith was like in your family growing up so we can kind of get a sense of who you are.
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California. I'm the eldest of 5 children. My mom and dad were from Indiana, and interestingly, they moved to California. Let's see, when I was about 6 weeks old, they put me in the back of a car and came out to California and never looked back. So I had my childhood out here. The faith was really vibrant in our home. Our family is Catholic, and my mom and dad, gave us that gift. And, I was born in 1963. So my sort of brand of catechism when I was being raised was, in the 60s and 70s out in California. So we were really involved in our church, and it was really like a second home. And I did a lot of music in church. I had the gift of Catholic education all the way through high school, and then went off to university at Notre Dame, where I met my husband, Greg. And we were married there a year after our graduation. But the faith in my family was really vibrant and really a part of, just as much as my freckles and my brown eyes, being Catholic was part of who I am.
Well, I have those same, I have brown eyes and freckles, light skin, the Irish there. So what one question I have is, it's not a question. Well, it's a question, but it's a remembrance I have, and I want to see if I'm correct. I remember that you were a French major, right? Is that what your degree was in, or did I
Yes.
get that wrong?
No, you're absolutely right, which I think is so funny. I became very fascinated with French in high school, and in college, I studied not only French, but also Spanish, a little bit of German, and a few years of Russian as well, and even studied in what was then the Soviet Union at the time for a semester. So I loved my
Wow.
French major. And, I think it's interesting that sometimes I think, well, that's not at all relevant to my life, but I think being a foreign language major teaches you to communicate effectively. So I do think that some
Mm.
of the skills that I had in my college years really come into play a lot.
It's funny that I remember that. I do have French in me. My maiden name is French, and so I suppose that jumped out. But also, I've heard your story before, and part of that was, what do you do with the French major? Like, what was your hope of what you would do with a French major?
Yeah, so Greg and I met the fall. Well, we really started dating the fall of my senior year, and by then we had both already applied to our graduate schools. Him to medical school, and me to this school called Thunderbird. It's an international management school for a master's degree in international business out in Arizona. And I did one semester of that, but then we realized very quickly. First of all, we don't want to be that far away from each other. We really want to get married, so we were engaged and we got married in the spring of that next year. But we also realized like the path that I was planning on, which would have involved quite a lot of travel and sort of world lifestyle, was probably not going to really fit in with his lifestyle. And so I had to kind of
Mm.
do a hard reset and look at what am I going to do now. And it was quite an experience, like just starting from scratch. But then again, I think God really had the perfect plan for us.
I think a lot of women go through that. I would say probably more than men. Men tend to be more stable, and the mothers, we need to be a little bit more resilient, flexible, kind of. So our careers tend to change a lot more. So, I mean, I don't know the statistics, but of all the friends that I have that have been mothers, we've had a bigger challenge than our husband in terms of laying out the path of our career, and it's changed throughout many times over. So I'm assuming that was kind of the case for you too, but at some point children entered the picture, and so you had to kind of figure out, what am I going to do? I'm not going to be traveling all over the world, right?
Yeah, so it actually kind of happened even before that. But when Greg and I were married, we were living in Nashville, Tennessee, where he went to medical school at Vanderbilt. And I was really lucky that once I left that first semester of graduate school, I came out there and I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I went into the personnel office, and they actually had a job in human resources. So they hired me. I was low man on the totem pole, man. I was the file clerk in the office, and talking about a come down earning like minimum wage, which at that point was about $3.15 an hour,
Mm.
to put files in file drawers with my Notre Dame bachelor's degree and a semester of master's behind me. But it ended up being amazing because the university paid for me to get a master's in human resource development, and I ended up managing that office by the time I was finished there, and had this beautiful new career in HR, which was really a great fit. Used the people skills that I love so much, and just taught me a lot and gave me the advanced degree that I was looking for. So by the time that Greg finished there and we came to LA, I had a great career for a few years, and then we had our first baby. And that was when it kind of became the issue of, okay, I'm working like around the clock. He's working around the clock. What's going to happen? We have goofy schedules. So I ended up, staying home when we had our first child a couple years into his residency. And that was not because I thought, oh, I'm so, have this burning desire to be a stay-at-home mom. We couldn't figure out the childcare piece. And in Los Angeles, it was just so expensive. But God's plan is always perfect because it turned out to be just the most wonderful path.
Well, again, and there's such practical things that we have to consider, and we don't always think about that. In fact, when I came out of college, I kind of wish that there'd been some training in what if you become a mother someday? Because
Yeah.
I felt like I was really prepared for my career and nothing else. And I knew I wanted that someday. And I got engaged at the end of college. And so I wish there were more training for that and more thought. And maybe that's happening. I don't know. But anyway, so we kind of have to figure it out on our own, right?
Yeah, I think it's a gift that now women have a lot more flexibility. And by the same token, these tools that enable us to work from home are also very hard on families, too. We blur the lines a little bit between home and employment these days. So I don't know if it's easier or harder now, but I do know that I actually didn't really begin to think about daycare until I was on maternity leave. So now when I
Yeah.
have anyone in my life who is pregnant, I say to them, figure this out before you set eyes on your baby, because the minute that you are holding
Uh-huh.
that baby in your arms, it becomes a lot more hard to make kind of like hard decisions like that.
Oh
So
man, that was the hardest time trying to work that out, and it didn't work. I
yeah.
finally was like, my first baby was so colicky and needed me, and my husband actually tried to stay home for a bit, and he would call me at work and with just hearing, I just could hear a screaming baby in the background. I'm like, okay, this is it. I can't do this. I cannot do this. So I too had to make some changes. It is interesting that you came back to that traveling thing later, but we're not there yet. So we'll start with the fact that motherhood was changing you. And it was around then. I mean, I don't know how old your kids were, but that you started this little website. I want to hear all about that because that's how you and I met.
Yeah, no, fast forward quite a lot actually to the year 2000, actually late 1999. My son, Eric, I have two sons, and the eldest was in elementary school and preparing for his first communion. And I went to, for folks who aren't Catholic or don't know about this process, one of the things is that they bring you in for a parent meeting at school. And we had a big conversation with the teacher about the fact that while they were helping him to get ready for this important moment in his spiritual life, it was really his parents who would be, the primary faith teachers for little Eric and his classmates. And I came home that night. My husband, Greg, at the time was really supportive of our faith, but he was not Catholic at the time. He since has come into the church. And I came home from that meeting just really feeling like this has fallen on me. And even though I had this great upbringing in the faith and lots of education, I really felt daunted by, how do I pass this along effectively to my kids? And so that night I went home, and when we were still dialing up, I dialed up on AOL, and I Yahoo searched Catholic mom, how do I be a good Catholic mom? And you would have
Oh,
thought that I would have, thought of this, and I'm sure I did, but not so intensively, at other points in his life, because, we were taking him to church and he was enrolled in a Catholic school and everything. But that night it was just really like, I need help with this. And so I went looking around and I just didn't find anything. And so the next day, I went to Barnes and Noble and I bought the book HTML for Dummies, which is HTML was like an early coding language for websites. I knew nothing about technology, Roxanne. I was,
mm,
I could make a greeting card on my computer and check my email, and that was about it. But I really had this sense that I wanted that year to really dive into my faith life. And so I built the site, not thinking that I had the answers, but realizing that there were other people like me out there who probably, were really interested in the same topics. And this was long before, social media or anything like that. With a
yeah.
static website, you had to add pages when you wanted to add something new. One of the things that I did really early on was to create a message board. And that was really like social media precursor. And,
Hmm.
if you imagine like the popularity of Reddit now. So back in those days, that was our way of conversing with one another. And the thing just really took off from the very beginning that this little thing that I thought was going to be my hobby just for 3 or 4 months until First Communion became my life's work.
Wow. That I've heard part of that story before, and it is truly fascinating. And one of my thoughts was what we will do to help our kids,
Yeah.
on this journey. I mean, the links we'll go to, and there you were starting a website. How did it kind of evolve from there? Like I'm trying to piece together, like when did I pop in there? I know that I connected with you, and one thing I remember like where I was when you sent me a little gift because I did a few pieces or something, and and you sent me a gift because you couldn't pay the writers early on. And it was like, wow, it was a t-shirt or whatever, but it was personalized. Like you hand wrote it, the address. And I was just so touched by that. So anyway, go ahead with the story of how it evolved, but I just had to throw in that little memory because it was so sweet.
From the very beginning, Catholic Mom was not like my site. It was really an open invitation for anyone who wanted to share their words. And I, at that point, was not a trained writer in any way. I enjoyed writing about my faith, and I loved what I was learning about the computer and the technology aspects, but I also loved just diving in and kind of living the liturgical calendar throughout the year and looking at new topics and everything that was happening in the church. And, when blogging became a format, well, we had other voices on the website long before there were blog platforms. So I'm not exactly sure when you dove in, but I know it was early on. And I know that you've been really generous in sharing your words and your experience. And that was the case, for really literally hundreds of women, some men too, but hundreds of women who have written over the years and shared their work on the site. And as the platform evolved into new technology, we incorporated a podcast. I began writing books and speaking, and it went from there. But really, it was the kernel of the website, first of all, and just connecting with other women. And, honestly, still some of my best friends now were women that I met so early on in that process, like Pat Gone and Danielle Bean, women like this that have been in my life for over 25 years now, and all connected through disparate parts of the country through the gift of this technology that brought us together.
And what I hear in there and what I saw and have experienced myself through being part of it is relationship and connection and how important that was, because oftentimes the life of a mother can be very isolating, right? And we're in our little house trying to do all these things, and there's a lot of moving parts. And sometimes we just don't have the capacity to have those full friendships and be hanging out with our friends all the time. We kind of have to take it in bits and pieces. And that was, especially when it comes to the faith, right? To connect with other like-minded individuals in the same state in life is such a gift. And you provided that without knowing, Lisa. The Holy Spirit really, really took off. And then from there, and I know I'm skipping ahead again, but I want to get a little bit into how you ended up like even traveling the world, like kind of where you had started off really being interested in other cultures. And through this little seed, you ended up doing that. And I'd like to hear about some of your adventures, some that maybe are highlights.
Yeah, I'm so incredibly blessed. The first kind of adventure like that happened, I don't even remember the year that it was, somewhere probably around 2012 or 2013. I had the opportunity to apply there was this thing that was happening at the Vatican. They called it the Vatican Bloggers Meeting. And it was going to be 125 bloggers from around the world. And I applied to this thing, on a whim, thinking there's no way I'm going to get chosen. And here's how bad I am. I really didn't even talk to my husband about the fact that I had applied, because I thought there's just no chance. And my phone started ringing at like 4 a.m. the day that they announced the list. And I was one of the very few, from the United States who were selected. And all of a sudden I had to wake Greg up at 5 a.m. and say, honey, can I go to Rome in like 3 weeks? So that was the first adventure. But that, that was a good example of just what happened from there. And I think my next trip after that, I won a fellowship from the Catholic Media Association to travel to the Holy Land as a guest of the Israeli government to see the work being done by the church around Israel. And that was just incredible. And then I traveled with Catholic Relief Services to Rwanda on the eve of the 20th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide to study the work of the church there. I've traveled with CRS to multiple countries, and then started also traveling with Unbound, which is a beautiful organization that does sponsorships of children and elders. And I've met my sponsored friends in the Philippines and in India. I've been to 3 countries in Africa, most recently the Dominican Republic with Cross Catholic Outreach, which is another nonprofit. So always with these nonprofits, the work is to go, write about what I'm experiencing, to share the work of the nonprofit, and to really soak in everything that I can from the people that I meet on those trips.
Talk about a mustard seed and how God grew from this little, moment where you're like, oh, there's a lot on my back. I want to do this the right way. Where do I start? And then to this, like it really is an amazing story, Lisa. And I'm so glad I get to hear more about it today. It's just fascinating. But there's so many things we could talk about in there. At some point, you became a well sought out speaker. You were on the radio frequently. I mean, you were out there doing all kinds of things. I remember when we went to, we were roommates at that conference. It was in Indiana, actually. So it would have been kind of where your,
My stomping
roots were, right? Yeah. And so that's the first time we met. And I had just started at the Fargo Diocese, and it was a quick turnaround, and I didn't really have time to get everything. I needed a place to stay. I was going to be funding some of it myself. And I'm like, could I stay in your hotel? Do you have a room? I know now I'm thinking about it. Wow, that was kind of bold, but it was a beautiful experience. And I kind of got to watch how your world was kind of taking off. And I was a little fly on the wall as we would go to different events, and people were just, really valuing your skills and wanting to connect with you. So it was like, there were stars in my eyes as I was trailing you. But yeah, what was that time like? Because I know that I think life has slowed down a little bit for you, as it does for all of us. And maybe you're not out there as much, although you're still plenty busy. But those were the flourishing years. Tell us a little bit about what God was doing. I'm sure it was overwhelming at times, right? Or maybe not. Maybe you were able to handle it all.
When that was first happening, my younger son was still in high school and college. And I remember feeling like the balancing act of that was really significant, that I get that right, that I, answer yes to as many opportunities to share and to serve as I could, but also to always realize that my primary vocation was in my home. And I'm not sure that I always did that perfectly, but that was always at the front of my mind. But my family was always so supportive of work that typically isn't, financially super well compensating. Greg, my husband's a ER doctor, and he's the breadwinner for our family. And he was always so supportive of the fact that my work, didn't really put a lot of extra money into our bank accounts, but it was so important to me and was such a gift to who I am as a person. And, I have to say that for all of those years, and that all still continues in sort of a different way now, but for all those years, sort of the most valuable parts of it to me were the opportunity to be of service in different places, to learn, and the people that I've met along the way, and the friendships. We talk about sometimes the internet being a very isolating place, but my experience of it is that I had to have deep friendships with people literally around the world that I wouldn't have had it not been for this work online that I do. And I really have seen the power of technology to, that when used correctly, that it can really grow into beautiful, fruitful relationships.
Yeah, the World Communications Day. I can't remember the exact thing, but every year the Pope makes a pronouncement and a document kind of encouraging us in that. And I know you were kind of instrumental in grabbing hold of that and really taking that to heart. And how can we do this the right way? Like you said, you were very conscientious of balance and what is my commission here? Because it was still evolving. Do you have any thoughts about those papal documents and how that kind of helped guide you?
Oh, they're so beautiful. And every Holy Father that put them out, every year it's this great gift. And we know right now we're anticipating a document from Pope Leo around artificial intelligence. So, I think over the years that what they've led us to is an understanding that the church must be present in these places, that we as people of faith who love, Jesus and want to share that love with others, that this can be a fruitful service field for us, but also that we have to really carefully guard and protect our souls in the midst of this. And that, always it's a balance. It's really attentiveness to the real people in our lives, to our parishes, to our families, and to an active prayer life that's not a digital prayer life all the time. And I think those are things that, all these years later, 25, 30 years later, we're still grappling with this. And I'm still imperfect in this and still always working on it in my own life, is how do I be present in these places, but then at the same time not fall into the trap of just being there 24/7 and neglecting the world that's right in front of me in my home.
Right. That constant tension. And I think it's a tension that Christians live with, because we have the world that we're in, but not of. And yet God wants us here. He wants us in these spheres. I think it was Pope Benedict that really kind of opened the floodgate, like, hey, you communicators, go out and be part of this social media stuff, and kind of, let priests kind of have the green light, like go out and meet people in those spaces. And I know that affected, you were very much a part of that when that was all unfolding. And yet, of course, yes, it's only gotten more complex as the years go by. And we have to really continually discern like where we're using our time the best, like you're saying. So you stepped into this authorship role, and I want to talk a little bit about that, and then also about some of the projects that you have going on. So share about that. Was writing a book and speaking and all the things that you ended up doing, was that a glimmer in your world? Obviously, you were equipped to do it, so you had to have the charisms, but do you have that dream like some authors do? Like, oh, I'm going to be an author someday.
Absolutely not. Absolutely. What happened was, around 2007, there was the first advent of podcasting, and people think podcasts are so popular now, but there was a big wave of podcasting happening back then. And I started listening to podcasts because I was super into the TV show Lost, which is kind of a funny thing. So I started listening to these podcasts after I would watch the show and listen to go into all the speculation about everything. And right around that time, there were a group of Catholics who were sort of picking up microphones and starting to podcast. So I thought, I think I could do this too. So I started a little podcast, and it was interesting because that podcast was mostly around interviewing, similar to what you do now, and interviewing different people. And one of the people that I interviewed early on was a really wonderful woman named Moira Weiss. She was the wife of the head football coach at Notre Dame, Charlie Weiss, and she had written a book that was published by Ave Maria Press. It's called Miles from the Sideline, and it was about their daughter Hannah, who has profound learning disabilities, and their life with her, ministering to her. And so I interviewed her, and somehow that interview came to the attention of Tom Grady, who was then the head of House, the head publisher at Ave Maria Press. And he approached me. There was a big conference coming up, the Religious Education Congress in Anaheim, that happens every year. It's sort of a place where lots of things happen. He approached me before Congress and asked me if I would like to have coffee with him. And I thought, sure, he's probably going to give me some more free books. This will be great. And at that coffee, he said, I've been doing some research on your background and listening to your show and reading your blog posts, and I really would love to do a book with you. Like, I'd really think that you have a book in you, and I'd like you to consider us as a potential publisher. And I said, no way. I do not.
Wait, you've been stalking me?
Right. I understand now that that's how that works. But at the time, I just thought, I don't even know how to, I know how to blog, and I barely can do that. So I don't know how to do that. And I physically, literally don't know how to write a book. And he said, he was so generous. He said, I'm going to give you, a great editor. She is a woman, she's a mother, and she will kind of like guide you and shepherd you through the acquisitions process. Well, that was Eileen Ponder, who became the editor on my first and all of my books with Ave. And, really, I thought that was going to be a one-time thing. I remember having like the little book party at my parish when it came out and just being like, this is just a pinch me moment, and this will never, I'll never have this again. And I was wrong. That writing career went on to flourish and to be very, very, very evolved in different ways. But those early seeds of what I was writing about, sharing my own personal stories, and my first work was for mothers, was really about my first book, The Handbook for Catholic Moms, which is in print in like a second or third edition now. It's, it's all about how we as women care for ourselves so that we can care for other people in our lives. And that was remains a very strong thread in the work that I try to do these days, that when we're talking about spiritually caring for others, that we always need to focus on our own spiritual journey as well.
I love that. I love that. Well, one of the things we want to talk about today is about one of those books. How many have you written so far? Do you have a count, Lisa?
Yeah, I think I just recently published my 19th book. So
wow,
that's crazy.
Yeah, especially since you didn't really think that was going to be part of your life. And I was thinking of all these writers out there that are trying to get, their first connection. And it's like, that was a dream, like the way that dropped, but you had done so much work up to that point. It's just that wasn't part of, the goal initially. So fascinating. But the latest book, Jesus Every Day, Jesus Every Way. So the question I wanted to ask was, can I talk to Jesus in the grocery line? Because, well, explain this book. And I want to know how it came to be. How did it manifest? It's a weekly devotional, just in little bite-sized pieces of how we can go through our day and really think more intentionally about how we can live out this faith life in small little acts. But tell me, how did it evolve?
So it evolved actually because Gary Jansen, who's a great professional in publishing at Loyola Press, approached me with this idea that he had. And to be honest, at the time, I know we'll probably maybe mention it later on, but I was going through a little bit of a health journey and I wasn't really looking to do a project right then. But Gary came to me with this pretty well-formulated idea and thought, take this and make it your own and write a couple sample chapters of it and see what you think. And after doing that, it was interesting when I turned those chapters in, he actually took it to their design folks. And that was really what sold me, was seeing those 2 chapters mocked up and looking like a book and how much fun I had writing them. I thought, well, maybe I could do this now, and God makes a way for things, right? So if this opportunity keeps knocking at my door, maybe this is something that I'm meant to do. But Gary gave me a lot of freedom with the concept. He knew that he wanted a Jesus related devotional, but he gave me a lot of freedom. And what we ended up designing was a book that takes a look at 52 gospel passages and really looks at how do we encounter the sacred in our everyday divine. So how do we find Jesus in those places of our lives that aren't me sitting in Mass or me sitting in the Adoration Chapel or me sitting in my favorite prayer corner in my house? Where is he in the other parts of my life?
But wait a minute, aren't we supposed to just take our prayer and go into our little our little spots? I mean, sometimes that's, I think, what people think Christians are supposed to do, but that isn't the truth, right?
I think it's both and, right? We have to have those things. I mean, you and I are fueled by the weekly Mass and Eucharist, and we are fueled by our routine prayers that we say, like the Rosary and other formal prayers that we have through the church. I'm certainly fueled by my morning prayer time every morning with the gospel in my favorite nook in my house. But a lot of times I'm not here in my apartment that I live in now in Los Angeles. I'm in other places, and life isn't always just those little corners. And Jesus wants to be with me in every place that I am.
Lisa, you mentioned your health journey. I want to tackle that on the other side of the break, because I know that what you've gone through has only, enriched and deepened your faith and what you can offer. It's such a beautiful part of this journey that God has you on. So if you don't mind, we'll take a little break here, and then we're going to keep talking about Can I Talk to Jesus in the Grocery Line, and how that has all evolved in the midst of your daily life and some of the challenges you face. So we'll be right back with more Lisa Hendey after this.
Local news affects your life. It gives you the confidence and clarity to make better decisions every day. You can support that with a digital subscription. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to take advantage of our introductory offer, just $6 for 6 months.
We're back with Lisa Hendey. We are talking, Can I Talk to Jesus in the Grocery Line? We want to talk about that. Like, how do we confront Jesus in our everyday life? I think it's kind of an evolvement that many of us go through, and kind of realizing that Jesus wants us to come out and use what he gives us in those more quiet moments. He wants to fuel us for the rest of our lives and to just shine his light out into the world. So that's what this book is about, just little bite-sized pieces of just getting us to think about things and just having something short and brief in this world where we're bombarded with information. It's a really doable little devotional. But before we kind of take off into that direction further, Lisa, I want to hear about your health journey, because even when we were roommates back in Indianapolis in 2015, I think, or something like that, maybe earlier, maybe before that, 2013, something. You were already having some health things, and I remember kind of talking to you about that when we were together and going to mass and different things. So, can you share a little bit about how that has sort of come onto your path and how you've had to, enter this time of vulnerability, really?
Yeah, so back in 2008, I was diagnosed with an early stage breast cancer. And back then, my kids were still in elementary school. It was actually when I was writing my very first book that I was diagnosed. So I wrote much of that book during my treatment for cancer the first time around. And that was an interesting time because it sort of was like, okay, get through this, do the 5 years. And then I really never looked back, and I didn't really think about it. The one thing that I did become very cognizant about after that experience was my own self-care, because I was very lucky that it was caught at the time that it was early, and I hadn't, honestly been taking very good care of myself before that. So that became really kind of a theme for me. And I'm not like, a marathoner or anything like that, but I am very into making sure that my body is strong and healthy for the work that I do and the care that I give to people around me. Well, fast forward to 2023. Let me think. Yes, 2023. It was the year after unfortunately, both of my parents passed away prematurely of neurological things within 10 months of each other. And I was just a few months out from that and kind of thinking, oh, now we're through COVID. Mom and dad have gone to heaven. Like, now I'm going to get back to my normal life. Because I saw something very like a strange looking situation going on in the same breast that had been treated the first time around. And it wasn't like a mass or anything, but it just looked weird to me. So I went to my physician, and that ended up becoming a stage 3 invasive lobular carcinoma diagnosis, which was much more serious than my first exposure to cancer. And within about 3 weeks, I was having a pretty radical mastectomy and reconstruction, and then did radiation long-term, my second bout of radiation. So my body has had its lifetime of radiation now. And then now I remain on pretty strong medications that I take every day, a couple times a day. And, this time around, it's interesting because I don't have the kind of fear factor of my kids being little. I'm 63 years old now, so I'm much more kind of at peace with my mortality, I would say. But I think coming out of it, the strongest feelings that I have afterwards is just gratitude and hope. Those are the two words when I think about this journey that really come out of it, is gratitude and hope.
Wow. Well, have there been moments? I'm sure there have. Like, I've had a few little cancer scares and things like that, and it's crazy how quickly the mind goes down a path. How did you stay hopeful during both of those bouts and continuing into today? And then the other thing, keep that in mind. The other thing I want to know is, it's one thing to go through this when you're in your home and you're a pretty private person. You were a public person. You were really out there by then. That had to be even harder to go through something, because you've been someone who has shared so much of your journey with others. How did you figure that out? So those two questions. I know I just threw a lot at you.
Yeah, hope is, I won't say it's easy. And certainly, being in and around a cancer environment, like just going in for treatment every day, you're faced with so many people who are struggling so hard. And so that, to me, like the emotive part of me that connects with people, I just always felt so terrible for my fellow patients. It's just like an awful thing. And so being a person of prayer gives me hope in the day-to-day basis that I could be praying for my caregivers and my fellow patients every day in a really intense way. But then also, as a person of faith, I love my life. I don't want my life to end anytime soon, but I love what lies ahead for me. I believe in Jesus Christ, my personal savior. I believe that God, wants to bring me to be with him in heaven. Whether that happens immediately, I don't know, but I long for that day. And so I never feared that I would die during this process, but I like to think that if I were facing that, that part of my thinking would be that, I live this life for what is to come next. And that is the greatest hope of all. And so there's that. The second part of your question, which was really good. And
public, public versus private.
Thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm going to say I've chosen to be very public with my cancer journey because, this time around, it was not spotted on a mammogram. In fact, it was largely, not seen on a mammogram because of the kind of cancer that it has. Lobular cancer spreads through cells, and so it does not form in masses. So they would not have seen this on a mammogram, and it didn't present as like a lump or something like that. I noticed it because my tissue in my breast started to look a little bit weird. And as someone who does a regular self-exam, I looked at myself and thought, that just doesn't look right. Something looks strange to me. And the skin was pulling in on itself because of the spread of the cancer, which had spread through about 2/3 of my right breast by the time it was found on MRI. So had we gone much further, we would have been looking at a much different diagnosis. So I share that to say, we women were often sometimes so bad about our own self-health care. And we think to ourselves, oh, if I just lose this 10 pounds, I don't want to go stand on the scale in the doctor's office, or I'm embarrassed about this or that. And I faced all that myself. So that's how I know to say that. But if we love the people around us and we want to care for them, we have to take care of ourselves. And so part of my sharing of this journey was, first of all, to say, like, just be aware of risk factors and, your own checkups and things like that. And then secondly, I had just so much beautiful support around me. And every time I share that I'm going through a struggle, I just have a mountain of prayer support. And frankly, I need and want that. So I'm not afraid of saying, can you pray for me? Can you pray for my surgeon who's going to be doing this big 12-hour surgery on me tomorrow? Can you, keep my husband in your prayers as he cares for me? So that, and I believe in this community of faith that we've created, and I know how buoyed I've been by those prayers. So that's why I chose to share. And I know some people want to be much more private. I don't share to say, look at me, I'm going through this, it's so hard or whatever. I share to be grateful and to be hopeful.
Are there ever points where, though, that you've had to kind of pull back and kind of pull into yourself? Because one thing, like whenever we put anything out there, whether good or bad or whatever, it like tends to, multiply. And in that way, like the prayer request, like that's beautiful. But has there ever been a moment where you're just like, I just need to kind of quiet down and kind of turn off all of that for a little while? Have you had some of those moments?
I mean, intentionally, yes. And during that healing process, it was necessary because I just literally was like, for about 3 months, I was just so under the weather that I could not, process the way that I normally do. And that kind of broke my heart. I had a whole year's worth of speaking engagements that I had to cancel. And thank goodness when I was doing that, I thought, well, that's the end of that. That'll never happen again. And thank goodness I'm back to speaking and doing my work now. But I'm more private, I'll say, about our family. I have a lot of regret about the way in which I was very open book when my kids were little and I didn't know any better. And now that I'm, a mom of independent adults and grandchildren, I don't, really share about my family online. And that's an intentional choice and to honor their privacy. And I think it's the right decision. And I really love watching how my kids are bringing up their children to be very, cautious about their privacy.
Yeah. I think to be fair to ourselves, it was something that kind of snuck up on us. And, we were kind of evolving as these things were evolving. And just like we want to share things with friends, I can see it. I understand it from their perspective. And I agree with you. I think they're setting better boundaries. But at the same time, I give ourselves a little bit of a grace because we were kind of in the Wild West. We didn't really
absolutely.
know. Yeah. And really it was the love of our love for our children that maybe led us to some of those places that now we were thinking, maybe not. But, we're all grappling along and learning together. But, wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing. How has God, what are some of the takeaways that you've gotten from journeying that way? And also kind of those more hidden moments where it's just you and God, really. And as much influence and interaction as you've had, at the end of the day, our journey is really like, even our journey out of this world, it's just us and God. and how has he kind of like helped that he's there no matter what?
I mean, I had the great grace of being with both of my parents as they passed away, holding their hands and praying them into their eternal journey. And there's nothing like that. It's a terrible, terrible moment, but it's also an extremely sacred moment. And so that, I think, having that happen so close before my cancer journey really gave me a different perspective on the dying process and what that means. But the living process, how we encounter grace and gratitude and hope in our day-to-day life. You've asked that question, can I talk to Jesus in the grocery line? I feel like now that I've come through this and I see this new appreciation in myself for the gift of my life, which I am so grateful for. My kids have always given me a hard time that I'm that person who will talk to strangers everywhere. If you're in the elevator with me for longer than one story, I know your life before we get up to the destination. But I really want to be someone who fully engages in the world around me. And so part of my evolution since cancer and since writing Jesus Every Day, Jesus Every Way is really to try to keep my phone in my pocket and to keep my eyes up and my heart open to whoever God puts in my path. And so I live in a very urban setting where I do a lot of walking. I have, we have a major college campus here at UCLA. I have a lot of unhoused neighbors living in my community. It's just when I walk out my door every day, I never really know who I'm going to encounter. And I really feel like God has put so many amazing people in my path. And whether our interaction is a brief, 30 seconds in the checkout line asking the cashier, how's your day and how are you doing? And, what can I know about them? Or it's something that's more involved than that. It's just a gift to be more fully engaged with the world around me. But then also I'm an introvert. So to find those times when I can fuel my quiet prayer life, whether that's in my home or in my parish or out in nature, which is one of my favorite places to be.
I love that you said you're an introvert because I am too. And I've had friends that said, no, you're not. And I'm like, yes, I am. Because it's all about that energy and how we use it. And we have such rich interior lives and we have to feed that. But I also was, as you're describing these relationships and these everyday sort of moments, it's a reciprocal thing, right? I mean, we have so much we can offer others and they have so much they can offer us. And that's the beauty of it. And also, I think something we really learned, especially during COVID, when we weren't able to have as many of those. We did what we could, but there was a curbing of those everyday sort of experiences. What have been some highlights in your work as an author? I want to talk a little bit more about this book. What are some of the, I guess, responses you've been getting so far? Because it's been out a couple months now.
Yeah, one thing about this book is that I really wrote this with a lot of people in my mind and in my heart who aren't in an active practice of religion or who are really never knew Jesus or away from the practice of their faith, and people that I know and love who aren't church people. And so I hope that it appeals to people who have a strong faith life, but I also want to reach people right where they are. And it's the reason that, for example, there's a VW bus on the cover of the book. It doesn't look like a typical prayer book. But I hope that whoever picks it up, if they're away from practice of their faith, whether their religion be Catholicism or something else, because they had some kind of a deep hurt in their heart, I hope that this is a resource that helps people to feel loved right where they are. Because it breaks my heart to know the amount of people who are away from knowing and loving Jesus because they've been hurt by people in their lives. And so that's a really important mission for me with this book, is to encounter Jesus in different places, to share that love too, but then also to feel comfortable going out to people. And, sometimes that's using overt words that sound religious, but oftentimes it's just being a good listener and a good friend to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I love about the cover is it's an invitation. There's just this little, like you said, the VW van, and it's getting ready for an adventure. And one thing I've really come to see is that life as a Christian, and in any life, but especially as a Christian, is an adventure. It's like God has us on this wonderful adventure, and we can miss it. We could miss the whole thing if we don't open our eyes. And like you said, Lisa, and I love this, looking up, starting each day, what do you want, Lord? Just putting ourselves into his hands. And I assume that's kind of a little bit what this is about, as far as just giving that little spark, because like I said, we could miss the whole journey. We could miss the whole adventure. And that's where that would be a tragedy, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one thing I think, Roxanne, about you is I know you to be a very good listener. And to me, that's been something that I've been trying to intentionally cultivate in my life the last few years. I'm a big talker, and I really want to work on being a better listener, because I think when we look at companionship and accompanying people, that's a huge part of it, is being a good listener.
My husband might take issue with what you just said, but I love it. I do try to be a listener, and I've conducted many, many interviews through the years where I've trained myself to listen and to let the story come out and to ask those questions. But in my everyday interactions with my kids and my husband, they might not say that. So that's a little bit of a challenge to myself. I have to keep listening. And I think I'm getting better at that, especially as I've had adult children. We're in a different place when we're mothering young children. We do have to yap a bit and scream danger, danger as they're running across the street. But things change a little bit, as we know, as our children grow, and we can get a little bit quieter and have maybe a little bit more wisdom. And the wisdom isn't just in knowing more things and having experienced more things, but knowing when to say it, when to reveal, and when to ask questions. Right? It's so interesting the way
I always think about that phrase in Scripture about Mary pondering these things in her heart. When I find myself wanting to give an immediate reaction to something, it's like, okay, take some time to ponder it in your heart. Follow our Blessed Mother's example. Just ponder.
And part of like being on a radio show is you have to be quick on your feet. You have to so part of you has been trained to have that quick response. But in the end, we need that contemplative time to bring us back and to just bring the temperature down and everything. What are some other, I know you have another really exciting kind of a revival happening with you started down the road at some point of writing children's books. And I don't think you remember this. I don't expect you to, but one of my sons, my youngest, who just turned 21 a few days ago, did a little bit of a review for your early Chime Travelers series. I want to hear a little bit about that, because now it's being animated, right?
I do know that, and it just cracks me up that those kids are, ready to have their own kids pretty soon.
Yes,
so
yeah.
Chime Travelers, the original books were published back in 2014, 2015. It's a 5-book series, and the books were acquired for film development all the way back in 2017 by Family Theater Productions. Family Theater Productions is here in Hollywood, and they were founded by Venerable Patrick Payton, who's an amazing priest who came over from Ireland and had this just really strong mission to encourage family prayer. His motto was always, the family that prays together stays together. And he saw the power of the media to do that. So he came out to California and began using first radio and then film and television to spread the word. And in his spirit, Family Theater Production still exists to create beautiful, resources for families. So they acquired the rights to Chime Travelers. And we've just very recently launched the first 5 episodes of Chime Travelers, the series. So it's now animated and live streaming, and it's just an amazing thing. It's just the greatest gift.
And now you have grandchildren, right? Who can start to begin to appreciate some of their grandmother's authorship and that kind of thing. How has that changed things, Lisa, for you? That now you have a new generation to appeal to?
Yeah, it's really interesting with, working for kids. I'm just going to say that I've written several picture books too. And so I do a lot of visiting of schools, whether virtually or in person. And kids will tell you what they think, right? If they like something, they're going to be your biggest fan. But if they don't like the way something goes, then they will let you know that too. So that's one thing that I've learned. And I think it's made me a better writer, because you have to be much more concise when you create for children. It doesn't mean that we're dumbing it down. We just have to be more concise in the way we express the message. And I just know from watching my own grandchildren that, the way in which they interact with their world, the wonder with which they see the world, I want a piece of that. I want to see through the eyes of a preschooler. And, and just this week I had my little grandson with me. He's 3 months old. And just to see, the way that he is starting to smile and engage with his eyes. And, it's just a sense of wonder that's so gleeful. I want that for myself.
Oh, I love children really can teach us about God's love for us. It's so beautiful to witness that over and over again, and in the many different ways. I love that you brought up Father Patrick Peyton, because I had Father David Marsham on a while ago to talk about the very thing that you're talking about. It also called to mind the remembrance that you, after you started this wonderful Catholic Mom website, it like grew kind of out of your hands at some point. You want to share, as we're kind of getting ready to close, kind of like the circular part of that journey where you started this little thing, and then it kind of just, I can't even imagine what it was like when you were approached, like, can we take this over? And it was a whole apostolate beyond yourself.
I was really praying about what to do with Catholic Mom, because it had far outgrown my ability to, I felt like I was limiting its growth. And so a big answer to prayer was that Holy Cross Family Ministries, again, founded by Father Patrick Peyton, approached and was interested in acquiring the work of the ministry. And that was such a great gift, because they are truly an international nonprofit. And the work that we do now, continuing on with Catholic Mom, I'm on the sidelines cheering on. I was on board as a consultant for quite a long while, but now I'm just sitting back, and I'm one of the writers too, Roxanne. And it's such a gift for me to see now, how things have evolved, and to understand that God has a mission beyond what I can do with Lisa Power that is just so perfect and wonderful. And I have such a sense of peace about it, that if it's God's will that things continue, that'll grow and flourish. And when the time comes that it's time for something else, that's going to happen too. So, a long time ago, I wrote a book called The Grace of Yes. And one chapter in that book was The Grace of No, and it was about discernment. And I think that's something that I've really been studying at this point in my life, is discerning, to what things do I need to say no, so that someone else can pick this up and move on with that. So it's been, it's a really sweet and blessed time for me right now.
I've mentioned before on my podcast that I attended the first CatholicMom.com writers retreat. And that was 2 Februarys ago. And you were supposed to be there, but you weren't able to come and join us. But that was such a wonderful gathering. So we got to meet some of the players there and all the good work that they're doing over there in Easton. But anyway, as we're kind of coming into a close and answering that question again, can I talk to Jesus in the grocery line, which you've answered so beautifully, Lisa? I just thought I'd ask before we go, maybe some huge takeaways that you can kind of or some message that you want to bring today, because I know you have a heart for enlivening people in their faith and just bringing them to Jesus. What are some maybe profound things that you've learned along the way?
I think the biggest message that I have, I don't know how profound it is, but it's really on my heart to say that, if you are listening to this, you are beloved, right? As you are, as broken as I am and as messed up as I am, that God loves me in the same way. A few hours ago, I was holding my little grandson and giving him my final goodbyes, and every hair on his head is precious to me. And that's you and I, Roxanne, for God. That's how much he loves us. And so, when we feel doubt about our purpose in life, when we feel that we're not being appreciated, when we feel underused or underloved, remember that you are beloved and that God has a perfect plan. And it will take lots of twists and turns through life. It will be unusual and unexpected and sometimes very hard. But have trust and faith. And please remember to be hopeful and grateful for this life that we have.
Well, you have said yes to so many beautiful things, and God has said yes to you, Lisa. And one of the yeses you said was to be on this podcast. And I am so honored that after all those years when we first connected on dial-up, that you were willing to come and talk to us today about your incredible journey. Thank you so much for all you've done. And I hope that you have just a lot of beautiful years now of just enjoying the fruits of your labor.
Well, thank you, Roxanne. And if people want somebody to pray with them, please reach out to me. I can always be reached through my email address, lisahendey@gmail.com. And I just love walking this journey with people. And I'm so grateful for your friendship.
Same here. And God bless you, Lisa. We'll talk again soon. Can I talk to Jesus in the grocery line? Well, we never did drill down into what this question really means in practical terms. Hopefully, you got the gist from my conversation with Lisa, who affirmed more than once that faith isn't just about going into our prayer corners, though that is an absolutely essential part of living the Christian faith. We must get fueled and fed before we can live the faith authentically and freely. But then, as we hear at the end of every Mass, we must go and spread the good news. We come to church to gas up, as it were, so we can do the real work of evangelization, letting all we know that Jesus is real and he really loves you. In her latest book, Jesus Every Day, Jesus Every Way, we are offered little nuggets to inspire us in that daily walk as we prepare to go out to meet Jesus ourselves, whether on a walk during an unplanned chat with a stranger or in the grocery line where we, noticing a heaviness on the face of another, might offer a kind word or even just a smile. As Lisa noted, we don't have to use deeply religious words in these everyday contexts. We need only be ourselves, the selves God formed us to be His, so that we might lead others to the heavenly banquet that awaits. I'm grateful to have been able to celebrate Lisa's new work today, but just as much, I'm grateful to celebrate Lisa. Despite all that she's accomplished and the many places she's been, at the end of the day, Lisa Hendey is just an ordinary mom, wife, grandma, faith seeker, and friend. But what she's been able to effect through her mustard seed vision reveals the God who has led her through her mothering years and into war-torn countries abroad, into spaces in which few have gained access and worrisome health concerns. Through it all, she finds in the everyday moments opportunities for nurturing others along with her own self and helping lead people to Christ right where they are. I loved how Lisa talked about walking out the front door and being eager to see what God has in store. But what's on my heart above all to highlight in this conclusion is the mentoring Lisa has offered countless faith communicators through the years. I can point to several of my own significant life's projects that Lisa played a part in leading me to. Through the years, I've tapped her for advice, and she was always happy to give it and always encouraging when the doors opened. And I know I'm not the only one. In February 2025, I met another of her mentees at the CatholicMom.com retreat in Easton, Massachusetts. Now a good friend and fellow podcaster, Jennifer J. Thomas is one whose life Lisa has touched indelibly. I asked her to share how Lisa has affected her, and she said this. When the word mentor is brought up, the first person who comes to mind is Lisa Hendey. After hearing Lisa share her words of wisdom on the Catholic Momcast, I realized Lisa was so much more than the founder of CatholicMom.com. Lisa took me under her wing to help me not just be a writer, but also a mother. I consider Lisa a motherly mentor because she mentors with the tenderness of a mother, embodying gentle, encouraging, and humble mentorship for everyone she meets. I hope Lisa's sharing today has inspired you to wonder about God's plan for you. No matter your age or stage, the adventure indeed awaits. Well, in a couple of weeks, we'll ask, should minors be able to access abortion? We'll talk with a young mom who has suffered through abortion herself and come out of it to find herself, after years of agony, resting in Jesus' beautiful forgiveness and mercy. Until then, don't lose sight of the light.